For more on President Obama's trip and the prospects for the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, I'm joined now by Bates Gill, Chief Executive of the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Bates Gill, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So how likely is President Obama's trip to be overshadowed by issues concerning China rather than focusing on trade and the TPP?
China is going to be the fifth country sort of in the room at all these meetings that he's going to be having across the region. So while not going there specifically, obviously China is going to be playing an important role in the minds of everyone who's talking. I don't think it's going to overshadow things, though, and I think the president's well aware that he has to strike a very delicate balance between moving forward with these important bilateral meetings he's having, but doing it in a way that reassures China.
Obviously, he wants to move forward. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a very difficult trade deal to move forward on and get any developments on. How likely is he to get any substantial moves on this?
Nothing that would be announceable, I don't think. Clearly, in his discussions with Prime Minister Abe and others in Japan, there's going to be some pressure placed, I suppose, to try and get a deal done. Maybe the two leaders will pledge to one another to see some compromises going forward. The president instead, I think, recognizing that there's not going to be anything big on the TPP, is going to point to other major important developments on the business front, the importance of American imports and exports in the region, the desire for America to be more deeply engaged, the success of the U.S.-Korea free trade agreement, and then other things like that, but well short of a TPP.
Do you think the TPP is bound to fall into the category of another WTO Doha?
I don't think so. I mean, what's interesting about this as opposed to the WTO is you have 12 countries, all who have signed up, all very much like-minded in that sense, and who want to see such a deal get done. There's always going to be the sort of lowest common denominator problem in any sort of multilateral negotiation.
Is that agriculture in this case?
It could be that. Beef and rice, of course, very, very important. Automobile exports for the United States to Japan is a key issue. But the difference between the WTO is we're not talking about 150 plus countries. We're talking about 12, all in one region, all that already have substantially low barriers to trade and investment that just need to be further pushed along.
And the pivot, the US pivot to the Asia-Pacific region, do you see, I mean, obviously President Obama has made a lot of commentary about this, but do you see that that is really resonating on a domestic front, that it's important?
The pivot? It very much so. I mean, I think most Americans, I think, in the broad middle of internationalist thinking, clearly it is in the U.S. interest to be more deeply engaged in this part of the world. This wasn't something President Obama thought of one morning. This has been the case for several decades, and I think the president wants to see us further accelerate that process. It is so obviously in American interest as a Pacific nation, as a long-standing Pacific power, to have the kinds of positive and constructive relationships that this pivot envisions. That makes sense to most Americans. I think the constraints come around issues of, does it mean a loss of jobs? Does it mean adventurism on the part of the United States militarily? How committed can America be to defending certain interests? But those, I think, are more nuanced. I think the broad strategic agreement, of course, is that this is where America needs to be, and we intend to do so.
And of course, Australia is a very strong ally to the United States. It's also very active in the region. The Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has just signed several different free trade deals with Korea. Well, hasn't yet signed the one with Japan, but has pulled it over the line. What role does all that play in the TPP negotiations, US-Pacific relationship and Asia relationship?
In my view, Australia is sort of on the rise in the minds of strategists in Washington as being a very, very important partner in this region. Interestingly, for example, in comparison to, say, countries like South Korea or Japan or the Philippines, Australia is not in any major sort of contentious relationship with any of its important neighbors. I think that sets Australia in a very, very good position sort of strategically.
So I'll just break in there. So what's happened recently with Indonesia is not seen on a broader global scale as being an issue?
I don't think so. I mean, we're talking about some pretty important geostrategic and contentious, even historical, long-term historical issues that exist between Japan and China, for example, Philippines and China, even between Japan and South Korea. I don't see that Australia has anything at that level of contentiousness and difficulty. And then, of course, with regard to trade, again, Australia being seen as a very, very important partner, a real leader, actually, on the TPP negotiations, very much like-minded. So just
How so in that respect?
Well, you know, Australia was one of the originators of pushing ahead in getting the TPP deal done. I think, by and large, we already see in Australia substantially much, much lower barriers to trade and investment. And Australia, as a major trading nation, with its GDP being so centrally concerned with international trade, far more so than the United States, by the way, it has such a greater interest even to assure that the TPP goes forward. So in other words, I think there's enormous overlap between what the Prime Minister has tried to accomplish in his recent visit and what the President's going to try and accomplish in this one.
And just before we let you go, Bates Gill, as you would be well aware, Australia will be hosting G20 later in the year. What sort of role could that play as a proxy to these sort of negotiations as well? You know, sideline sort of chats, that sort of thing.
Well, the G20 is always very important for what it provides in, at a multilateral level, the chance for leaders to come together. It's a rare opportunity for leaders of that level to meet. So it's going to be an extremely important meeting. It's also going to be President Obama's second visit to the Asian region. Before he lands in Brisbane, he will have been in Shanghai, in China, and also in Myanmar for other significant multilateral meetings in Asia. So it's going to be sort of a capstone, I suspect, and we can hope that by that time, late November, following the elections in the United States, midterm elections, maybe we'll see greater opportunities for the TPP to go forward.
Bates Gill, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.